Hello again. Well, we're back again to discuss another Gotham vigilante, Stephanie Brown, otherwise known as Spoiler, the fourth Robin, and at one point Batgirl. Stephanie is a character with a history only a year younger than Tim Drake's, meaning she predates Harley Quinn's arrival to the comics and makes her older than many perceived staples like Damian or Bane. Let's start off strong with something familiarly contrarian. Stop me if you've heard this one, because the next verse is the same in reverse. Point 1. Stephanie Brown is skilled as hell, and I don't say that lightly. The Spoiler began her career in vigilantism when Arthur Brown was let out of prison again and quickly set about recruiting and then breaking a gang to his will and launching a string of heists that left Gordon, Bruce, and Tim baffled. Meanwhile, despite Arthur keeping his business and home life separate, Spoiler was shown tracking his every move, navigating the rooftops with ease, acquiring or building an advanced listening device, and being able to pull this stunt and other similar ones off without being caught or leaving any evidence behind for Batman to track. Despite Tim briefly managing to grab her, she came out on top of their skirmish and escaped. He thought she was a criminal for reasons, and in the final battle she put on just as good a show, if not better, of fighting her father's minions than Tim did. She even saved Batman's life, and he saved hers in turn. This strong debut was followed by Arthur orchestrating her kidnapping and her civilian identity through a gang of elite criminals under the pretense she'd be collateral, but it was actually so he could trick Batman into capturing them for him while he'd be keeping the loot they hid. Batman and Robin were completely taken in by the gambit. Meanwhile, Stephanie, who had spent 2 weeks captured, decoded his plan by circumstances alone, and despite the leering and threatening behaviour, mostly seemed annoyed by her captors and was ready and capable of fighting the moment the opportunity presented itself. It was after this two-hit combo that the writers realised Stephanie had been a hit and decided to take the once-off character and fold her into the Robin 1993 series. This didn't really serve anyone well. I say that because the writers, either due to dislike or pure preference, weren't willing to let Stephanie be Tim's equal, let alone better than him at anything. They more or less ignored her previous skills in order to have her sidekick for a sidekick. Batman's initial wariness and discontent at working with her was changed from being concerned over her mixing vengeance with heroism to him thinking she was incompetent for vaguely defined reasons, and much of the extended Gotham vigilante community tended to treat her as the black sheep or incompetent regardless of circumstances. But this is not to say that after becoming a co-star in the Robin comics that Stephanie didn't get to show off her skills or get good stories, either there or in other series. Some of her best can actually be seen and teamed up with Cassandra as Batgirl. The fact that no one in the Bat Clan can match Cass in a fight, but that she was relatively inexperienced in dealing with investigations in society, meant that Stephanie was able to bring a lot of street smarts and other skills to their team-ups, letting them complement rather than take from each other. She also got to put on a solid performance in her team-up with Huntress during the No Man's Lands incident before the writers seemed to just forget she existed. There are some other fun points of trivia, such as accidentally getting the drop on Batman, defeating Lady Shiva's elite disciple, or accidentally knocking Tim around when he broke into her room in the darkness. These positives also apply to larger cases, like saving Tim and Connor from an ambush when their paths crossed during the same investigation into a group of gun runners, or the time she tricked Black Canary into following a false lead on Riddler, stalking her across the rooftops and hovering barely 2 feet behind her without being noticed with only minimal external training. There were of course low points or storylines that just seemed designed to try and make her quit, but these either involved ignoring her skills or, again, were storylines seemingly designed to make her quit, like the pregnancy arc, which wasn't in itself bad, but that requires its own video. Plus, other times a lot of the critiques of her just came off as unfounded or framed as correct by the narrator despite not really being presented as such in the comic or by the actions of the characters. Probably one of the most extreme examples involved Batman letting Spoiler take the lead on a uranium bombing case, and she did literally everything Batman did only to reach a dead end like he did, and for him to say that she wasn't competent because of that, when he only succeeded because he knows other superheroes he can call and ask for help, which is how he resolved the case. This was capped off with Batman rubbing her father's death in her face, which she had very complicated feelings about, and then him kicking her out of the cave. This was not the first or the last time he invited her into their circle, only to cut her out at seemingly random or based on something unfair, something Barbara Gordon also did at different points. The constant providing and then sabotaging of support networks inadvertently played into her death later. Speaking of which, Point 2. Stephanie did die, and it also wasn't her fault. The War Games arc was a big event in the Batman mythos at the time, but while the idea of Gotham's gangs exploding into a major war was in of itself intriguing, the execution left a lot of people unhappy. It came hot on the heels of Stephanie having become the first main timeline's girl wonder, only to get fired for disobeying an order by trying to save Batman's life, something Robins do all the time. A desperate bid to regain Batman's acceptance that was in stark contrast to her initial rebelliousness when faced with his disapproval, Stephanie acquired Bruce's most recent long-term crime control scheme. one that involved the heroes Orpheus and Onyx taking over a local gang and eventually would involve Matches Malone using them to take over all crime in Gotham. Suffice to say, I think this plan was doomed for failure even if Stephanie hadn't activated it early. I mean, Bruce is a guy who couldn't convince his eldest son to stick with college or stay in Gotham and consistently misjudged and damaged his relationships professionally and familially even when he was trying to do a good job. So the idea that he, as a low-tier gangster with the aid of two other mid-tier gangsters with no bodies to their names, could get the entirety of Gotham's criminal underbelly into his service, especially when they are all some combination of deeply unstable, violent and very intelligent, just comes off as outright impossible to me. Diplomacy. It's not one of Batman's skills. Especially given for Black Mask to take over, he basically had to be the last man standing and obliterate Batman's public credibility on live TV to win, and Jason had to run around taking heads to even try controlling Gotham's crime rate. Plus, the whole meeting fell apart because one guy tried to light up a cigarette, so I doubt the meeting could have even finished before something went horribly wrong. But I digress. Naturally horrified by the unintended consequences, Stephanie did everything she could to stop the gang war, but like Orpheus, eventually ran afoul of Black Mask. Orpheus is basically a video unto himself, but I really wish he'd be reintroduced to the comics. I liked him. But as for Stephanie, this led to multiple days of extended torture, and based on the framing, dialogue, and behind-the-scenes details, some writers wanted to go much further but were held back by the artists, finding their joy in her suffering disturbing. Throughout all of this, she never broke, even escaping and being able to kill Black Mask but sparing his life out of respect for Batman's code. This allowed Black Mask to shoot her and eventually get info he needed from Hush anyway. Despite the torch and the gun wound, Stephanie still managed to get out and was eventually found, taken to Leslie's, where she eventually succumbed to her injuries. Heartbroken but somewhat comforted in her final moments by the fact she had helped people and had been Robin, that it wasn't all just a trick to lure Tim back. Like Jason, the writers quickly set about trying to make this not Bruce's fault at all, eventually claiming Bruce did get her to Leslie on time and that Leslie, a pacifist, murdered Stephanie to prove some kind of point. Along with the usual stuff along the lines of she was reckless, she had it coming, because ambushes are always fair and that right. Suffice to say, this didn't go down well with Stephanie or Leslie fans or fans in general and led to the Girl Wonder movement, which eventually forced the writers to retcon her death rather than resurrect her and claim she'd just been hiding in Ghana for a year. As it stands though, this was a retcon, not a secret plot or story hook. Stephanie was planned to be dead forever, was canonically dead for 4 years and only brought back due to a widespread movement and massive blowback, so I definitely still count her as part of the dead Robin society, because I'm kind of beyond blaming a character for the decisions of writers who only acted due to massive waves of fan pressure and didn't bother thinking about the implications of their decisions. Point 3, and sadly the shortest point, but Stephanie Brown was a good Robin. Having dreamed of the role for a very long time, she took it up after Tim Drake was forced to retire. She passed the Robin training in record time thanks to having developed most of the skills on her own or through her very brief and sporadic mentorships. She was integral to the solving of every case that she participated in: Penguin's major gun running op, the capture of Tiger Moth, the serial killer's Zaz, as well as a litany of unnamed cases and the time she saved Batgirl from an assassin as seen here. Her run was short, but apparently so popular that some wanted to try keeping it going, but the editors and certain other figures forced through the initial plan, essentially killing her Robin run in the cradle. Later, some like Didio tried to refute it ever existed, along with trying to erase a lot of independent or legacy characters down the line, such as Cass during the New 52, at least until they were forced back in the timeline by the fan demand. Albeit usually radically changed and not necessarily for the better. Steph's Robin run has been getting more acknowledgement in recent years, though that's been a mixed bag. Some stuff has been good, some stuff less so. Conclusion. There's honestly so much more I could say on this subject, like how Stephanie and Jason have a frankly absurd amount of parallels, up into including weird trivia like her debut coinciding with his birthday, along with both of them being even Robins who came from abusive and impoverished backgrounds that are either hinted or established as having faced sexual violence and that were killed due to editorial drama and blamed for their deaths after the fact. Then there's the whole Bruce was projecting Jason onto Stephanie and straight up said this, which factored into his extremely warped treatment of her, but again, for another day. For now, I'll be signing off, but if you want to help out with my bills or like my work, please consider donating to my Ko-fi or Patreon, where you can also see scripts, stories, and 3D art, and even make requests.